Interesting.
Okay.
Get the car.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Irvine International Academy Board Meeting on June 18th, 2024. We're beginning in a morning hour today at 9 a.m. because there'll be significant training for board members, and we'll have most of the action occur and votes following the lunch hour or near the lunch hour. But I do want to welcome everybody. I want to do a quick roll call with our board as well. And I'll start to my left, and I'll look at Molly. Good morning to you. Then Brett Freeman.
Present.
And I'm Doug Hewson, present as well. Felipe Delgado. No, Felipe, yeah. I
He
didn't
just
quite-
has to unmute.
Yeah, unmute now. We have Felipe we can see. And then in China, I believe is Miller Zhang, but he likely will not be joining us because of the time change. But chime in, Miller, if you did happen to surprise us and join us. If you do, we acknowledge you. And then David's son, which I believe will be present in just a few moments. Does that sound right, Dr. B?
He'll be here 11:30.
11:30 for the action items. Great. Well, we have then quorum in the county, and we'll begin as we often do with a pledge, and then I'll begin our training session and ask Dr. Bean to lead us through some of that. Could I lead a pledge of allegiance? I'm going to stand and turn to the other direction. We'll say hello to some of our special guests, both online and in person here as well. Hands over heart. Let's begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. You want to, in advance, thank all of our guests who have come for training and to help this board sharpen up. Add to our skills, it looks like. We have Caroline Wesley, who will discuss with us some updates from our committee. Is that right, Dr. B?
Yeah, so we are working with Dr. Wesley on a countywide petition. We, as a group, have decided to delay that a little bit because we just hired a new principal, and we would like the new principal to be a part of the input process. So originally we were going to submit July 1st, but now that's going to be delayed probably 1 or 2 months until the principal can give input to the countywide charter. And then Dr. Wesley is going to share with us a timeline of what that may look like. And so we'll just turn it over to Dr. Wesley.
Good morning, everyone. You sound like you have a very full day. You'll be here all day enjoying each other. So thank you for your commitment to IIA and charter schools. As Dr. Bean said, I'm Dr. Caroline Newhouse Wesley, and I am working on your countywide benefit charter petition to Orange County Department of Ed. I have been doing this for a long time, and I've been supporting your school. I did get to meet some of you in, I think that was January, at a board meeting. But I wrote your PCSGP grant and the third-party review, and I intend to write your next PCSGP grant when you get this charter approved as well. So I do have success with countywide benefit charters. So I did write Sycamore Creek Community Charter. That's the Waldorf school that was just approved for K-12 at in OCDE. And that's exciting because it's the first Waldorf high school now added in Orange County. So let's talk about the timeline. If we're pushing for a submission in August 1, what does that mean? And what has to be done before that and what has to be done after that? So once the new principal comes on board, the charter petition is 15 elements plus additional provisions. And the most of the language, the legal language, minus 2 new laws that were just passed, those have already been added to the template and have already been reviewed by Young Mini and Core. I know you're going to see Janelle Rulli a little bit later today. So that's her team that works on that. So what needs to be done? Element 1 is the crux of any charter petition. Element 1 is often 100 pages and the remainder of the charter petition is often 100 pages. So that's where we talk about the educational philosophy, the instructional strategies that are going to be used, the grade level served, the community that is going to be served. The benefit of doing a countywide benefit charter is because your community now becomes all of Orange County. So any student from any city in Orange County will have preference to attend the new charter school. The other piece is, so my hope is that when the new principal comes on, we can really work on that instructional strategy piece, that educational philosophy. It won't change too much from what you have already at IIA. Definitely focus on dual language, but it's actually going to be world languages. So we're not going to constrict the petition to only Mandarin and English. We'll, list a variety of languages depending on where the school is eventually located. What is important for the board to know? And what is your job in this process? So your job in this process, let's just assume we're going to submit in August. So the county has 60 days in order to do a public hearing. The public hearing is actually a presentation by the school to OCDE board, and it's usually 10 or 15 minutes. They will let you know ahead of time, and they mean 10 or 15 minutes. They will cut you off, but that doesn't include public comment. And so this is the time where you want families, you want yourselves as board members, you want county officials, you want parents, and you want students to make their 1 to 3 minute speech in support of the countywide charter. Then you do your presentation, and it's a short presentation, basically, building on the success of IIA, and that is huge benefit for you because IIA is a very high performing charter school. So building on that success and then replicating that success. So using those same strategies and staffing models, etc., to now expand or replicate. You're replicating the model countywide and you're expanding to grades TK through 12. So it's actually both. After the public hearing, they may ask you questions. They may not. They may just say thank you, and you'll say thank you, and you'll go off and empty the room at that time. Then what usually happens between the public hearing and the what we call the decision hearing is 2 things. One, the staff at OCDE will call you in for a capacity interview. They may have questions like, expand more on what you're going to do for, English learners, will expand what you're going to do for students with disabilities. They will almost always have questions, and you usually respond to those in writing, and then you also discuss them at the capacity interview. So who needs to be at the capacity interview? Obviously, the executive director, the principal. It's good to have 1 or 2 board members present. I would assume you'd want special education represented and English learners represented. I usually say, about 5 or 6 people should be present. They often have a lot of questions about fiscal. They often have a lot of questions about facilities. So just knowing that those questions will always come up. Then after that, and 15 days prior to the decision hearing, the staff will submit their findings either to recommend or to deny the charter petition for a countywide benefit charter. That has to be submitted 15 days prior. They're very good at that. They will submit that and you can, if it's hopefully a rousing support for, you don't need to respond. If it is a recommendation for denial, then you can address each point in that denial and send that to the OCDE board. And then you prepare for your decision meeting presentation. So at that presentation, the county staff will present for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then you will have equal time, either 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And that's when you kind of maybe address any concerns that they found in their findings. That might be a time where you expand on something that they questioned you about, and you kind of give it that last good push that this is the best reason to accept. Again, public comments are very important. So make sure that you have your cast of characters ready for that as well. Board and or parents, students, staff, county or community support or partnerships, etc. So what is the biggest difference between just submitting to Irvine or submitting to the county? Obviously, if you submit to Irvine, your preference is to students who live in the boundaries of the Irvine School District. If you submit to the county, then your students come from anywhere within the county. So that's one benefit. And the other is that it's really kind of establishing you as a world language immersion school. And you've already had that practice with IIA, and you can replicate that model. And then your authorizer is then the Orange County Department of Education. So you're approved by the board, and then you're supported by the staff at OCDE, which is fantastic because of all the places in California, the only place, honest to goodness, that I would even attempt a countywide charter is Orange County. They are the only ones who are supportive of charter schools and have shown some recent approvals for countywide charters, as I mentioned, Sycamore Creek Community School. So any questions for me? So, timeline. So let's just figure if we submit in August, then the decision hearing will either be September or October. Public hearing will either be September or October, and the decision hearing would be in November. If you push that back by 1 month, like let's say you submit in September, then the decision hearing would be no later than December. There's really no opportunity unless Orange County makes a procedural error for this to be appealed to the state. After AB 1505, those rules have changed. And I will tell you, OCDE, it would be unlikely for them to make a procedural error. It would be likely, though, that they will approve. So what questions does the board have for me as we go through this?
Would all of this prepare us to open a second campus this time next year, August next year?
I couldn't hear your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, would this allow us to open a second campus by August next year?
By August 2025 is the plan.
If the decision is no, yes. And I know you mentioned there's no appeals process, but can we go back to them?
Absolutely. So, yeah, and that's a good question. Thank you for asking. So sometimes if if the recommendation is to deny, let's say you get that 15 days before the board, the decision hearing, and you find out that the staff does not support the decision moving forward, you do have the right to pull your petition. I have done that with other clients. We pull the petition, we make the very specific changes that they wanted in the findings, and then we resubmit. That you, especially as early as we're moving forward now with an August or a September submission. I would say as long as it's approved by March, you should be able to open in fall of 2025.
Right, I think.
Because this will apply all the way through high school, are we obligated to start high school education immediately or on a particular timeline, or do they just hold us to the timeline of the petition?
So if I heard your question correctly, you write in your charter petition what it is that you know, when you want to start and which grade levels you want to start with. So if, let's say you want to start TK through 3 in 2025, that's what they'll expect. But any of those additions or changes to start date, planning time, implementation, that can and has, there is a very good precedence for changing. So let's say you can't get a facility by fall of 2025. And so therefore you can't open the school. You can't, your charter is already approved. So you would do in your memorandum of understanding with Orange County, you would then move the start date, let's say, to the following fall. And that's very common.
Okay.
I guess to build on that question, whether we start another school that's TK through 8, let's say, versus continuing the existing school here from 9, the high school, 9 to 12. We need to present both of those options in the petition.
So if I can answer that, and Dr. Beam, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think our plan is to go ahead and submit the countywide charter, benefit charter petition for a TK through 12. And then once that has been approved, absorb IIA into that model.
And that model allows us multiple campuses?
It does. Now, you may have to do a charter amendment because technically locations and addresses you have to have approved by the board. They have to know where you are, and that is because you have to, communicate with the districts where you intend to locate, and they have a right to say, I really don't want you here. You're going to steal my kids. And then you say, yeah, you're right. We are. Thank you.
And then you mentioned that it's going to be language agnostic, right? So it's going to be open to.
Yeah. I mean, you have a part of Southern Orange County, very close to northern San Diego that has a very large Arabic and Aramaic population. You may at one point want to include those languages as well. So, you're kind of open. I think our focus is kind of Mandarin and Spanish, but and those will probably be used as examples, but it will not be limited to those two. Okay. If you don't have any other questions, I'm sure Dr. Bain could answer the rest.
I have one more, just to pick up on something you said. So we'll know in advance of the decision hearing which way they're leaning. So like you said, we have 15 days if we need to pull it before, but we can read the tea leaves, which way it's going to go.
Right. You can read the tea leaves and definitely communicate with the board members, invite them to events, do the background work and the legwork and the super secret, backroom conversations that always happen. Those are important. I always recommend, sending information like newsletters and things like that to the board, as well as inviting them to events, whether they come or not, that's okay. because at least they'll remember that they've been invited. And you can definitely, I used to send for about the month before the decision hearing, testimonies from parents, families, community partners, staff. I pick out about 4 and I would send each of the board members those 4 testimonials just to keep them in your mind. And you as board members play a special role. So, reaching out to those board members on the OCDE board and, just saying, hey, this is where we are and what we're moving forward on.
The petition document, where can we find that?
Pardon? I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
The petition revision, we're gonna change mics. This is better for this one. The petition revision has actually been shared between me, Caroline, and Young Minnie. And so you can have access to that as well. We're gonna open up access to the principal so that we can all, and our academic team, so we can all add into it. Delano's gonna have access as well.
Timing.
The timing, so my recommendation now after you've been presented the current timeline is to delay this till probably for September submission. Because it doesn't make a difference between August and September anyways, because you're gonna miss Prop 30, you're gonna have to do Prop 39. And does that mean that you'll be able to open another campus by the fall of 2025? Probably not. However, you can expand to 9th grade, because we can go all the way up to 12th, right? Expand to 9th grade, in which then we submit a Prop 39 application to Irvine Unified for those grade levels, in which then they would have to kind of find room for those extra students. I will ask legal in terms of, we've got this one parallel submission of countywide charter and this other parallel pathway of submitting Prop 39 application. You do need to do Prop 39 because they're not going to make a decision whether we submit in August or September about the countywide.
Yeah,
so-
and that's because Prop 39 is due on or before Halloween, usually. That's the date we remember. So whether you submit in August or in September, you won't know if you're approved prior to the Prop 39 application being due. And just for the board to remember, you can't apply for most grants, PCSGP or expansion or replication grants until the petition has been approved. So there's no point in us trying to do that as well right now, because we need to be able to be approved first, and they're pretty picky about that, except if it's a federal grant, but that's just easier to make sure you're ready to go.
Caroline, I'm not sure if you can answer this question or if it's more of a legal question, but if we are submitting Prop 39 and submit countywide, let's say the countywide is approved, let's say that it's approved in December, how would then we notify Irvine Unified? Because we would not have submitted a Prop 39 on the new countywide. We'll only submit Prop 39 on the current charter, Irvine International. But can you submit a Prop 39 on a potential countywide charter?
No, and Prop 39 for a countywide charter is a little more tricky because they would have to provide you county space, not district space. So unless you know the district where you're planning on locating, which we're still not 100% on. So I would definitely ask Janelle that question because and she will be on later today. I know you've got other issues and it's not agendized, so maybe she could get back to you. But Prop 39 goes to districts, not to counties. So it's kind of tricky.
Correct, but I mean, we do know, so you have clarity. We do know that we're submitting the first city in Irvine because we want to have our Irvine International transition to the new countywide in Irvine. And then the other city is more than likely San Juan Capistrano, although that's to be determined. But the first city is absolutely going to be Irvine.
Right.
That's where our school exists right now, and we don't want to displace these parents.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
So if we know it's in Irvine, we need to ask Janelle
How do we submit for Prop 39 after the fact when a countywide has been already approved? So let's
So-
find out.
Yeah, and I will say you can't submit a Prop 39 after the fact, but you can. And that's the Prop 39 questions are more of a Sarah Coleman question, but you can do alternative use agreements with districts or counties. And that's how a lot of countywide charters use school space, is not necessarily through the Prop 39, but through an alternate use agreement. Let's say you get approved in December, you've already missed the deadline for Prop 39. By usually March, when they're making the recommendations for Prop 39, you know, or offering space, they may, you know, they may have a charter school that closed and now they don't have the space, which means they don't, all right, they don't need the space, now they don't have the income. You can say, hey, give me 4 classrooms at that space. So there are ways to work
will-
through that.
Piggyback on what Caroline's saying, what we will do is get approved for Prop 39 with our grant, Irvine International.
Yes,
And then we can say, look, you've already approved us for Prop 39 for IIA. Now just approve us for IIA under the new countywide charter with an agreement.
yes,
Or the strategy could just be that let's just get through this year under our current charter. And then do a countywide charter, not in 2025, but the following year, 2026. So that we know we're secure in this building. And then submit a Prop 39 when we get approved sometime in the 2025.
What's the lead time on the PSG?
Yeah.
BCSGP, what is the application submission time?
submissions usually October, maybe October 15th. And then there's also the federal expansion grant that's due in the end of June. So there's 2 options there.
When will those be paid out or a tranche? The first tranche is available all the following year.
So remember, PCSGP is Delano's favorite grant to monitor because it is a reimbursement grant. You actually have to have the cash up front. You submit the reports and the invoices, and then they send you the money to reimburse you for what you spent for PCSGP. I'm not sure if the federal grant off the top of my head is the same way.
But usually how quickly is that money available? Is it, I mean, is it available as quickly as you spend it? Like you spend it and you request, there's some lead time there. I guess I'm wondering that.
Yeah, that's about 8 weeks from the time you submit and approve the QER, the quarterly expense report. So you have 3 months, every 3 months you submit the quarterly expense report, and then it's 8 weeks or so for them from the time they say they approve it until it will be given to the school. So it's actually quite a long lead time.
So what I'm gonna do is ask the board, recommend to the board in this board meeting to make a decision on whether we want to submit. First of all, I honestly do not think August is even ready for that. So if you're going to submit in September, why not then just submit a countywide in this school year coming up for the school year of 2026. So that you know you're in this building through Prop 39 for an additional year. If then some parents say, well, what about my 8th graders matriculating? Well, number one, they have 10 8th graders, right? So I would say to those 10 8th graders, I'll come back when we have 10th grade. Or we could submit a mature revision to go TK-12 under the current charter we have. So mature revision will happen pretty fast, right? Make that happen first, and then do the countywide second, all in the same year. So that you can expand to 9th grade. And then you can, the following year go into that. So those are things you want to talk about strategically. We could bring in young Minnie and Caroline to have a working discussion on that at the next board meeting. But I do recommend as a ED that we do not submit in August because I don't think that we're gonna meet that timeline. Is that correct? Because we need to, don't we have to notify the districts that we plan to be in 30
Yeah,
days?
you have 30 days. You need to notify the districts. So, like, that would be July 1 if you're submitting August 1 or,
That's not enough.
August 1 for September 1. The last thing that I wanted to share about the timing, August submissions are really hard on districts and counties. Because we all know August in the school, circle of time is a very busy time getting ready to start the school year. So sometimes it actually upsets the chartering authority if you submit in August, because they're like, we're so busy and now you just threw this big work on our plate. So sometimes it is better to wait until September. I like the idea of the 2 pathways, doing the material revision to add up to 9 through 12 for Irvine, and then simultaneously submitting the countywide charter petition. Those wouldn't necessarily have to be one then the other. They could be simultaneous.
Are there any disadvantages to doing that? 'Cause that sounds like a great idea.
It kind of sounds like a great idea because so a material revision, you still have to go through this whole process. You still have to redline the current petition with the changes that you want to add, as well as include any new legal language. It's the same timeline. It's still the 60-day, 90-day. The process that I just went through is the exact same. The benefit, I think, of doing that would be that you secure a high school for your matriculating 8th graders, which I think is perhaps an interest for you to support families that way. It would for sure give you a TK through 12 model. The downfall is that adding a high school starts to create more anxiety for any chartering authority, because with high schools come, sports and prom and parking spaces and driving and AP classes and A through G requirements and College Board. So if you don't have someone on site who really knows that, I'm sure Dr. Bean does and could answer those questions, they sometimes get a little more anxious about adding high school. Unless you have a really solid high school program that they feel that you could add while still maintaining that dual immersion model that you have at IA.
One, Dr. Bean, I know this is, depending on how this afternoon goes, this is like the big if, right? So, but one big question I have, and probably others, is what does high school, what does 9th grade look like in IA? Very, and all those things, it's very difficult to make decisions on that without really knowing that package. So,
Yeah, when you plan a high school, make sure you plan it 9 through 12, and you backwards plan for your 12th graders graduating. What do they need? They need A through G. They need some AP courses. They need athletics. And then backwards plan that all the way each grade level. Then 11th grade, they're going to need this in order to get to 12th grade. And then you get to the 9th grade, which is the first grade we would open, and say, okay, if our 9th graders are going to graduate in a few years in 12th grade, we need to now set up at least a pathway for them to get their A through Gs, a pathway for them to be able to take APs and honors classes as a sophomore, junior, and senior year. So you set up that foundation as the 9th grade and you open up 9th grade. Now, the alternate pathway is, third pathway is keep everything the same, TK8 right now. Don't focus on a material revision to add a 9th grade, because in essence, that's all we would be doing material revision for, is those matriculating 8th grade going into 9th grade. And so don't do that, but just do a countywide charter where we submit in the middle of the school year coming up for not the next fall, but the fall after, and then you'll have a good 1.5 years to plan a full high school program. And then open up the doors to then potentially opening up for 9 through 12 to see what we can get in there. But more than likely, at least opening up 9th grade when we do the high school. So that's the third pathway. Just we're securing what we may go through changes, We definitely have gone through changes with staffing and principal. So we're in a different situation we are now than we were 3 months ago when we presented to you the countywide charter pathway. Right? So this board needs to discuss that strategy on, you know what, let's just continue doing well. We know there's some transitions happening this year. Let's continue doing well. Let's do IIA well. Let's submit our Prop 39, at least get that. Then after we get our Prop 39, we can submit it countywide for the 2026 fall and do it right. So that's something you guys want to discuss as a board.
So, thank you, Dr. Beeden. I totally agree. I will say I was executive director of a school that was K-8 and then added high school. And so when I was there, it was a span school, but they added 9 through 10 in 1 year, and then the following year went straight to a 9 through 12. The downfall, so now it was TK through 12th grade. The downfall of that is, and Delano can speak to the cost. Cost of high school is a little higher because of the activities and things for students. AP courses, trainings, prom, sports, all of that kind of comes with an extra added cost. They do come with a little bit more money, but they also cost more money. So do keep that in mind. I think, you know, you don't have a whole lot of 8th graders that would be impacted. And so sometimes I think, you know, are we making this decision for 7 families, or are we making this decision to take the time and do what's right for the long-term health and stability of the charter school? So in that case, I would perhaps recommend waiting, because building a true high school program takes time. And you want to do it well. And then you will have to be WASC accredited as well once you add the high school, so that the classes are transferable to college.
So there's a business case aspect, and then there's the actual curriculum, what the program would look like, and we haven't seen those, so
That's correct.
those are big unknowns.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Things to discuss. Okay,
Caroline, we appreciate your time. We're gonna move on to our agenda, but thank you.
thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a great retreat.
Thank you.
Bye. You guys need a restroom break, or can we bring up Delano to talk about business and fiscal policies? What do you guys think?
I think we keep pressing on.
All right, let's do it. Bring up Delano.
And you hope you use this mic, this is much louder.
I think I will be shouting if I.
This is much louder.
Okay. Hopefully I won't need the microphone
You sound pretty
for,
good.
for right here. I'm pretty loud as it is.
Get feedback from that speaker.
Yeah.
As long as people on Zoom can hear.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Do we have anyone on Zoom, Mary Beth? Can you tell?
Felipe.
Felipe's still on.
Felipe's on?
Can hear him.
Hey.
I can hear him.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
I'll give you guys back.
Okay. My good folks, good morning. Thank you guys all for being here. So today we're gonna touch on policies and procedures, fiscal policies and procedures. And before I do that, you know, one of the things that sort of comes to mind when we talk about our fiscal policies, procedures and things like that. You'll notice that when your authorizers come for their visits, that's one of the things that they're looking at, right? Hey, How do we safeguard the assets? How do we safeguard and make sure that the resources that you're getting, they're going in the right place, they're not going in Dr. Bean's pockets, Mary Beth pockets, things like that. And that everyone, and ultimately this body here is in the driver's seat and the all-knowing and the all-seeing eye when it comes to that. Before we dive into that, I want to bring up something.
Was that a
visual pun?
Yeah.
Because you were in a swimming pool.
Yeah, sometimes, right? So I always like to sort of go back and look at the why we're here, right? For these reasons. And just a quick search of charter school fraud cases, you'll get, boy, you get a ton of them, right? They just go on and on and on, right? Here's one that's recent from 2022. Here's another one from 2024, right? This one from 2022, if you look at it, these folks were able to make off with $400 million of your money and my money, right? Because we're all taxpayers in the state, right? A lot of that happened as a result of the left hand not checking on the right hand and vice versa, right? And they probably didn't have the appropriate controls in place to ensure that your tax dollars didn't go to buy Ferraris and nice houses and nice vacations in Hawaii and other tropical islands. I won't bore you with all the details here, but you know, they just go on, on. And if you look at it, millions, right? You know, there's always that millions of dollars. That's quite a bit. It's not like they're stealing or taking. And sometimes it's just a lack of information at the board level that allows these things to go on, right? Because, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the fiduciary responsibility of this body is to safeguard the assets like a, you know, like a security guard, like, you know, you're there and nothing is getting past you. But in your downtime, you want to humor yourself, absolutely. Just Google that and you can see there are tons of cases associated with this type of thing, right? This one was down in my neck of the woods. And these guys here, you know, the state then came up with a task force later on. And anytime they come up with something after the fact, it's going to punish everyone who did nothing wrong, right? Because that's usually what happens. The bad actors got away with it, but then those who are left standing, you now inherit the punishment, you know, in terms of new compliance, new reporting, new measures, things like that, to make up for it. And as you can see here, they got 215 million back. That's a lot of money, right? Imagine that could have gone here, right? What we would have done with it.
You just
Right.
take 5 million.
Yeah, we'll just take, you know, we'll just even take the last digit, right? Or even the one in the middle, or the one up front, you know, or the first two, right? But let's dive in. And I sort of wanted to have that as context for our conversation, because I think it's important for us to sort of, when we talk about these things, that it's not that you're overbearing or Dr. Bean is overbearing or I'm overbearing when I say, hey, let's make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's when it comes to that. Let's dive in.
Delano, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just, you know, I think I can speak for the board and certainly for myself that that type of activity never entered into our minds. You know, so for me, it's a huge shock to hear that, you know, how could they do that? You know,
Yes.
and that's a group effort really in a way, because there's no way some single individual could get away with that much money without somebody else noticing.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point you make, Philippe, that a lot of the actors, there's a lot of collusion that's going on, whether it's at the board level, at the school level, or both, right? And if the fiscal policy is being adhered to, it would be really difficult for one person or a group of people to get together without someone saying, hey, stop the presses here, you know, something is wrong, right? But it happens more frequently than you think, right? And one of the reasons why sometimes I believe your authorizers are ever so careful about making sure that everything that we say and do when it comes to the fiscal portions of this entity is to prevent that, because ultimately there's a reflection on them in terms of, hey, you guys were asleep at the wheel and allowed these guys to do these things, right? And trust me, no one wants to have that as their legacy, right? Having that. And surprisingly, and the most disturbing piece of that is that no one served any jail time.
Wow, that's amazing.
No,
That's
no.
amazing.
Yes.
So what governs, let's get North Compass or any of the groups that do similar work here in terms of fiscal policy? Are we talking about GAP? We're talking about Sarbanes-Oxley, we're talking about Dodd-Frank,
Mhm.
what, is there something specific related to schools?
Yes, and we're gonna talk about that.
Okay.
Just so you'll see it. We're gonna touch on quite a bit of that in just a second. Yeah, yes. Right, so then today we're gonna talk about the most important piece, our fiduciary responsibility, and that's one point that you brought up there. And why our policy is important, right? And then we'll take not a deep dive, but we'll just sort of look at some of the key components of your fiscal policy, what they entail, et cetera, and how do they keep everyone aligned, everyone on the straight and narrow, the checks and balances that are there, et cetera, right? And part of that is what we're doing now. That's one component of that, is to make sure that we review them, we discuss them, and that check-in every month is so vital for that process. And as I mentioned, establishing good policies is a way, it's more of an investment of time than money, because you can have someone write you a $10 million fiscal policy, but without implementation and putting into practice, it's worth 1 cent. Nonprofits or even all volunteer groups can commit to conversations and documentation needed to establish sound fiscal policies. Specific policies and procedures, they vary, right? Because the policies that are here are going to be somewhat similar, but somewhat different from, maybe a school down the road, or maybe another organization across town, right? But inherently, they do have some similarity, but there are going to be some differences in the same way that we all have different shoe sizes or different types of shoes today. And as I mentioned, there isn't a one size fit all here. It's more tailored to each individual organization. Some fiscal policies will tend to be extremely tight in terms of every single thing must come before this body. Some are loose in terms of not everything comes here. There's consent on certain things, and in terms of spending thresholds, things like that. Those are the areas where you will tend to see a lot more fraud, is when your executive director tends to be a little rogue, right? Not bringing things forward, not being transparent. And we'll talk about transparency and what that looks like in just a minute. Brent, you mentioned, hey, what does this all really mean anyways, right? And how do we go about establishing at least, some baseline? Most of us have heard of fiduciary responsibility to some degree, right? But have we really given it thought, right? What does that really mean, right? And Doug, you may want to challenge me on this a little bit, or you may, but the definition that I see that works best is this: the fiduciary responsibility, also known as fiduciary duty. And I'm not sure if this word legal here comes into play. It may or may not, right? But it's an obligation to act in the best interest of another party. The other party is this entity, this body that you all serve. The word fiduciary means, plain and simple, trust, right? And the person with the fiduciary duty has a legal obligation to maintain that trust, right? In the same way that Dr. Bean has trust in the board, the same way you will have some trust in him that he's doing the right things when you guys are not looking, when you're not here for the 20 or 30 days out the month that he's left alone to do his bidding, so to speak, right? And expand on that just a little bit more. It's important because they can help protect assets. They prevent conflict of interest, which is a huge one. As an example, if Dr. Bean says, you know what, I would love for my son or daughter to teach here, right? And he just puts them on the payroll, right? Or Brent may say, you know what, Dr. Bean, I'm the board, you have a board position here?
The secretary.
Board secretary, I would love for my daughter to spend every day in your office and not in class and have some influence over you, right? In that way, right? So now we have these conflict of interest because you now are influencing him to do something that benefits you and your family, right? In that same way. And it involves care, loyalty, good faith. And then these are all things that, make an honest person, so to speak. Because I think the way that we measure that is, what do we do when no one is looking or watching us, right? How is our integrity, our character, right? And that's what really at play here, right? Prudence and disclosure. If I see something, I say something. I guarantee you, I love Dr. Bean. But there may be a time where I'll have to come to you guys and say, you know what this guy did? Right?
Tell us.
Or Mary Beth, right? Yeah. And I have that fiduciary responsibility because I owe that to you to be loyal, to be honest, to be truthful, and to protect the assets and safeguard the assets of this institution. And you also have that duty in your oath that you take as a board member. This is the one I love. It all falls on you guys, right? Doesn't matter what I do. Doesn't matter what Dr. Bean does. Whenever I hear fraud, I always go, well, what does the board know? Right? It's like a parent. If my son or daughter acts up, we're the parents. Sometimes I'll go to the store, I'm in Target, and when I was a kid, I would do this too. Me and my brothers and sisters, we would play in the clothing rack and play hide and go seek. Your parents are looking for you, and every once in a while, a kid will knock something over, and you're walking by as an adult and go, "What are these kids' parents? What are they doing?" Right? And this is part of that. Who's watching the inmates here, right? Or who's watching the children, or who's watching the money and making sure that things are being followed, right? That the fiscal policy has been adhered to. And without the benefit of this is when this happens, right? Without the benefit of a sound fiscal policy, we tend to get these things, right? Primarily this big one on the end here, right? Embezzlement, right? People are stealing, they're taking something that does not belong to them. And keep in mind, every single dollar that comes in here does not belong to any one of us, right? They belong to the two people, the students and the public, right? Because those funds are earmarked for those purposes, for public benefit. The state of California places restrictions on every single dime that we get. Usually, most of the local donations will have some of the same. The whole grant will have something. The K Family Foundation will have at least some restrictions on what they can do. And imagine if Dr. Bean said, hey, you know what? I'm not going to use that for legal expenses. I'm not going to use that for the science curriculum. I'm going to use it for a field trip with only my kids, right? Or I'm going to take the staff to lunch, right? That still falls within that line of here where the board will say, hey, we're out of order, right? And that's my responsibility as well as the first line of defense to stop it and prevent that from happening, right? Because this is a shared responsibility. I mentioned that, it falls to you in the bigger scheme of things, but you have a contract with me that outlines and says, hey, I will act on your behalf to the best of my ability to make sure that nothing leaves here that is not approved, authorized, or has your blessing, right? Why are these things important? Maintaining meaningful and well-considered policies and procedures is a critical component of a strong financial management system. I use something called AccuFund. AccuFund is an accounting software, right? All the reports and the things that you guys get every month, they're derived from that, right? The process for those things begin here at school with Dr. Bean and Mary Beth and staff, right? They float information up to me. I then take that information, I make sure that the proper controls and authorizations are in place, signatures, backup, support, etc. And then I do my piece of it. And that third piece is then I report to this board exactly what we did. Right, so you get a check register every month, right? So you can see every check that was here. And if you wanted to see the physical copies of those checks and make sure that they were signed with the receipts, etc., absolutely, right? We're being as transparent as possible so that way you folks can sleep well at night knowing that the assets are being safeguarded. And we use the policies, to establish an organization internal controls for ensuring compliance with regulatory standards, GAAP, FASB. FASB is the Financial Accounting Standards Board. That's what we use as our guide. So I want to make sure I point that out as where we are. There are two standards. The government is GASB, FASB because we're a nonprofit. GASB is usually for school districts, county office, etc. But for us, because we're a nonprofit entity operating in a public way this way, we were sort of semi-government, semi-public, right? But we follow FASB, which is the Financial Accounting Standards Board. So they set the tone in terms of how we operate, how we classify revenues and expenditures, things like that, how we report them out, right? And so when our auditors audit our work, that's what they're using. They're using the FASB standard to do so.
So Delano.
Yes,
we've
sir.
got Standards for the accounting and reporting, and then superimposed on that, we have additional reporting that your organization is doing for us as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. In addition to that, there are compliance reporting pieces that are laid on top of that. And great observation there, Doug. The reports that we provide are not necessarily just for your benefit, but it's also for your authorizers' benefits as well, so they can do their portion of that, which is, hey, they're checking to make sure that we're reporting things correctly, we're reporting things in a timely way, and what we're doing is true and accurate in conjunction with FASB, right? And also with the state of California for any public revenues that we receive, right? And what you will find is that the federal and the state will have similar standards, some more stringent than the other, some more loose in terms of what's okay. But for most of our restricted dollars, they're usually boxed into a pretty high standard, or if you will, reporting, things like that. And I want to touch on this a little bit. Documenting the organization's fiscal policies also serve as an abilities and ultimately for ensuring that the organization's financial data is an accurate and reliable basis for organizational decision making. That's key because we wouldn't want you coming in here every morning and sitting in Dr. Bean's office waiting on him to go, I'm going to watch you today, right? Or Doug to come in and make sure that, he's here every week and he's just walking around. No executive director would appreciate that. It just because it's almost like now you're in his lane, right? And it's sort of like driving on the freeway, right? If there are 5 lanes, there's one over here that's moving slow, this one's moving a little bit faster, and until you get all the way to the carpool lane, right? We don't necessarily like to use the carpool lane where 2 or more over here are doing the same thing, right? We want to make sure that everyone knows their roles, understand their roles. This body has the most important role, but it only meets once per month. Some organizations may meet quarterly, things like that. So it's important to have that trust. And we go back to that in the people that you hire. But we trust, but we verify, right? And that's the sentiment that I always use. I trust, but I verify. You tell me it's sunny outside. Okay, nice. I'll put my shorts and my t-shirt on, but before I go out there, I'm going to check to make sure what you say is true, right? Because it's important that if it's not that way, then we take steps to adjust for that. It could be raining out there. It could be cold. I may need a jacket. Protecting the assets of the organization. And again, as I talk to this body, this is primary goal for you all, right? And let's make sure that you're protecting this. The reason I showed you those cases there, you know, while the school has a budget of $6 million, every penny counts. Nothing walks out this door that's waste. Nothing walks out this door that's embezzled or stolen or given to friends and families, right? And usually those are the areas where we start to see things going off the trail or off the rails when those things are occurring and the board is not in the know or the board doesn't, if you will, adhere to their own policies, right?
Delano, we
Yes,
can
sir.
just share your presentation. Public.
That's okay, I'll just do it this way.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Oh,
And I will email this out to Mary Beth as well. You can even put this up on the website, things like that. Ensure maintenance of accurate records of the organization's financial activities. That comes in the form of the interim reports that we produce, the budget that we produce, the monthly financial statements that we produce for you guys. All of these things are kept and are readily available for scrutiny, inspection, or review by not only by yourselves, but members of the public, your authorizer, and just person, you know, in general who would like to know more about the school or this organization. And this provides a framework for organizational financial decision-making, right? How will you, if you, you know, I always go back to, you don't know what you don't know sometimes, right? And in this case, it's important for, if these things are occurring, that now you can make informed decisions, right? We can't go by, you know, 3 buses for the school because currently we're not in the position to do so, right? And without knowing that, and I've seen clients who in schools who have done this, right? They make bad decisions because they're lacking information, right? Oh, sure, we can afford that, right? Without thinking beyond, you know, hey, when was the last time we reviewed the financial statements? You know, do we know how much cash we have? Do we know how, you know, Dr. Bean is approving expenditures, et cetera? Establish operating standards and behavior expectations, and this serves as training resource for staff and ensuring compliance with federal, state, and local legal reporting requirements. And I think this here is key because it's important for your staff as well. It's one thing for you all to be well versed with the fiscal policy, but where the rubber meets the road is with the staff here. Do they understand the fiscal policy? Do they know what it entails? Mary Beth has a credit card that she uses on behalf of the school. Does she understand what it means when, you know, in the fiscal policies, when it says, hey, look, within 24 hours, bring the card back plus the receipt to Dr. Bean. Dr. Bean will approve whatever that purchase was before we get it, right? Our standard at North Compass is if there's no signature, there's no payment. Right? Plain and simple. It could be the lights are gonna get turned off. I'll have to make a decision at that point to weigh what's in the best interest. No lights or no signature, right? But somewhere we'll have to come to a, you know, an agreement on that, but no payment, no signature, no payment. Yes, sir.
One of the things that, you know, between you and Dr. Bean that brought a lot of staff harmony was expectations on how much could be spent on a room decoration. How does
Yes.
reimbursement work, you know, through Mary Beth's office? Do you get a smart board, and at what level is a smart board appropriate?
Yes.
There's a lot of positive relationships within the school because the expectations are clear.
And I think the key there is consistency, right? I'm not gonna say, yeah, Doug, sure, you can have a smart board that's $35,000. Brett, no, you can't have a chalkboard, right? You know, or Molly, no, absolutely, you only get crayons, right? You know, we have to be consistent because the policy is gonna be consistent, right? And if we're adhering to the policy that says, you know, expenditures over XYZ amount requires board approval, you can't backdoor and go to Dr. Bean and go, I know this is a little bit above that, make an exception for me. No, right? And then that creates equity for everyone, right? If we're operating under the same guidelines. This is the key one because this comes up quite a bit. Who's responsible for what? Right? And as I mentioned, ultimately the board, all of these responsibilities falls to the board, but you have delegated those to Dr. Bean and staff, because again, you're here once per month, right? The business of this organization happens every single day, sometimes even Saturdays and Sundays, right? And so it's important for you guys to know that while you're not here, those duties are still being carried out by someone on your behalf. For example, policies can cover cash handling, travel expenses, executive director compensation, conflicts of interest, all right? In your policy, I believe it states that you set the salary for the executive director. The executive director then sets the salaries for everyone else, but all of that still comes back to the board for approval, right? So there's this circular thing that happens, right? And it's important for everyone to understand that it's not just what Dr. Bean does, it's what this body does as well, right? He could make a bad decision, but here you guys come and go, up, yep, let's rubber stamp that one and off we go, right? I see that quite a bit. And it doesn't happen here because this body has something I like to see: independent thinkers, right? They're not just a rubber stamp for the executive director. You guys ask questions, meaningful, well thought out questions. I oftentimes see where a board will not review the material, and there could be something in there that's going to be, controversial down the road. And here, I'm good for it. And every other board member, I'm for it as well. And next, you have a controversy, you have an issue on your hands, right? This keeps the fiscal policy, keeps us all on the same level and out of trouble, as I like to say. Establish internal control policies can include internal controls, which are systems of practices and procedures that protect assets from fraud or error and ensure accurate record keeping. Every month, and you guys don't necessarily see this, but we reconcile all of your bank accounts. We reconcile the treasury, we reconcile the operating account. Those are readily available for inspection at any point in time, right? Your authorizer takes a special interest in those. Every year, they want to see the entire year of bank reconciliations. Why? Because that's usually where the most fraud is occurring. How do you know I'm not stealing from you? Right? How do you know that Dr. Bean and I haven't colluded together in some way, shape, or form? Right? Again, part of that is that trust that it's not happening, but there's a place where we can verify that those things are not occurring, right? And that fiscal policy is what really keeps us in line and in check to make sure that no theft or fraud is occurring. Strong policies demonstrate accountability, transparency, ethical practice, which can help create public trust and convey integrity. One of the things that you do not ever want to lose is public trust, right? When you lose the trust of the public, they walk out of here in droves, right? It's funny how trust works that way. The smallest little thing can break that, right? And so it's important for us to make sure that all of our stakeholders, it says donors here, but I always look for this word, interchange this word with stakeholders, right? When they trust you, they will support you, right? Especially when you're doing the right thing. And I'll put that up there at the top, This is why it's important, because we build public trust. We build the trust of the parents, the staff, via that fiscal policy. Obviously, it ensures compliance with our authorizer, the state of California, et cetera. Most of your funders, either locally or at the state level, they're going to want to make sure that your fiscal policies are in line with your authorizer's expectations, this board, et cetera. Let's take a look now at some of the components of Irvine's fiscal policy. And I outlined about 20 of these, sort of summarize them. I promise you this will be quick. I won't bore you with the fiscal policy I always like to put a little bit of this back on the board to say, hey, look, late night reading is always good for the soul. And this will be one of them. Hey, it covers a variety of things, right? You know, it covers, you know, our accounting procedures, as I mentioned. It covers our bank reconciliations, our records keeping, the internal control pieces of it. And let me touch on that just 1 second. What I mean by internal controls are these. So within my organization, I cannot initiate a check. Yeah, I'm the top of there and I can't write one check. Right? I can only sign off on it, but that's it. I have someone else that inputs it, someone else that reviews it, and then I only approve it to be paid. That's all that I can do. There are 3 individuals that are involved with that process. The same here. Dr. Bean, yes, he can initiate a payment, right? But at some point that needs to come back to this body for approval. And it will be clear when you look at the check register, oh, Dr. Bean, why did you pay yourself $20,000? Right? And if that's hasn't been, first of all, it wouldn't even make it to the register because I would immediately stop there and say, hey, did you get approval from the board? This requires board approval. Okay, we'll bring it back to the next board meeting, right? Now, I've had people will say, well, just go ahead and pay it and we'll bring it back later. No, because again, my fiduciary duties and responsibility says, hey, I am a gatekeeper at this point, and currently until you give me the right answers, you cannot pass through the gates, right? And so that's how that works, right? Ultimately, in the same way, Doug couldn't just go to Dr. Bean and say, hey, I want you to write a check for $50,000 without it coming back to the board for discussion amongst his colleagues to make sure that was the appropriate and prudent thing to do. Here are the first 5, right? So our fiscal policy covers our basis of accounting, right? So we use the accrual basis, and I'll tell you what that means. You know, this is where revenues are recorded when earned, expenses are recorded when the liability is incurred, regardless of if we have the cash or not, right? So that's just our basis of it, and that's laid out in your fiscal policy. Thank you. Our bank recs, right? Monthly, to ensure that the organization record match the bank statements. So we're obligated to do those things. That's all part of what we do on your behalf. Those are laid out in the fiscal policy. Our records keeping, right? We are obligated to keep records for 7 years on your behalf. So from the existence of this organization, if you ask me, hey, Delon, I want to see a check from 2019, I have it. If you want to see the financial statements from any month within that period of time, we have it. Any report, anything, we have to keep them. And I have quite a bit of storage dedicated for this process. Internal controls. This is how we safeguard and to make sure that transactions are being properly authorized, appropriated, executed, and recorded. Documentation related to financial matters is completed using electronic systems and processes, meaning my accounting system, my check writing system, my reporting system, all of those things. They're safeguarded in the sense of, you know, security, but they're also where these things are also housed, and I can readily access that information on your behalf. Lines of authority. The governing board approves fiscal policies and procedures. And then here's a key component of that. You delegate to the administration, in this case, Dr. Bean, right, to act on your behalf. The board also approves budgets, reviews financial statements, and commissions the annual audit. Right, those are all documented in that policy. This is just more or less.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
So you have online bank access for the school?
Yes. Mhm.
But your access in terms of the bank account, is it just to view?
I can only
Your
look,
access,
yes.
only you can download transactions, let's say the register,
Mhm.
to bank statements. Things like that.
Yeah, I have no authority other than to log in, to view the balances,
Yeah.
and to download a statement. I can't write a check, I can't wire money, I can't do any of those things.
Dr. Bean, from your perspective, from the ED role, when you access the bank account, can you initiate payments, online payments?
I can do that through Mary Beth, as long as, you know, we go through back office first. Yeah. And make sure that's there and then we initiate.
But does it have a secondary authorizer through the bank account, or how does that work?
The second authorizer will be, well, here's this. Depending on the amount, right? So I believe Doug, you are that second signer. As soon as Dr. Bean initiates something, you will get some communication that says, oh, either it's gonna ask for a text, for you to send him a text or something to say, hey, this is happening. What will happen, even if the two of them colluded together and said, hey, yep, I'm gonna send you a text, we're gonna take this money, we're gonna take a night's vacation. No one will know. Yes, they will know immediately. As soon as I do that bank reconciliation, I check that bank account more so than, you know, I go in there and I just log in to see the activity because that's part of my duties to make sure that, yeah, you know, I want to make sure that nothing is happening. I want to know early. But let's just say I didn't do it for an entire month and I get that bank reconciliation and my team is doing it. The first thing you're going to ask for is the backup for that transaction because it's going to stick out like a sore thumb, right? I'm going to come back to Dr. Bean. Hey, buddy, I see that 20,000 was transferred out and I don't know where it went. What happened? Where's the backup? Oh, Doug and I got together and we decided. That's when now I'm making phone calls. I probably will email Brett. Hey, I would like to talk to you. Sensitive matter. May call Molly, you know, so I mean, call someone and we'll have that conversation. Here's what happened. These two won't even know that I'm doing this. Right?
How much more time? Because we have the
Yes.
attorneys on at 10:30.
I will give me how many times we have here? How much time?
Yeah.
10:30. I'll walk through fast.
Okay.
6 through 10. Segregation of duties, as I just mentioned, is a key component. The budgeting process, which we do. The audit, which is then that audit of my work and all the compliance pieces that go along with that to make sure that I've done things in the right and true and correct way. The timeline for when that audit is completed, and then most importantly here, the IRS and state tax returns, because this is usually where also your auditors will be able to find out if things were out of compliance, if there was some type of fraud. And that's the ultimate test for me, is when your auditor comes back and says, hey, we didn't find any areas where anything was questionable. And that's usually a sign off on me to you that things are copacetic. Just a few more here. We produce annual payroll reports as well. Cash receipts are recorded on a daily and weekly basis. Deposits are made. Deposits totaling less than $2,000 are made weekly. Deposits over $2,000 must be made within 3 days, right? So these are all the pieces there that no checks or cash are just sitting around here waiting for someone to steal it, take it, or misappropriate it in any way, shape, or form. Expense and accounts payable, it speaks on that in terms of what we do and what's in the policy, how that goes. Expenses are approved by the executive director, the budget manager, and invoices are reviewed and processed for payments. Purchase and procurement, here's a key one, right? You have a threshold. Anything over $50,000 must come back to this board for a conversation, right? Regardless if it's in the budget or not. 16 to 20, last page here. Credit cards, this is a new one, right? We did this last year. We established this policy last year in terms of credit card usage, et cetera. This body did approve a credit card policy, if you recall, sometime in the year. Asset management, we capitalize anything over $5,000. Loans, all loans from third party requires board approval. So your CSC Growth School loans, they're all here. The revolving loan from the state of California, that's also another one that you approve, all insurance and contracts, et cetera. And then last but not least, the local control funding formula via the budget when you guys approve those. These are all the components of your fiscal policy in a nutshell. I encourage you all to read through that policy. You know, it may take you a few weeks or months to do that, but familiarize yourself with it so that way you're always in the know. And when you're more informed in this way, you make better decisions, right? So I will leave you with that. I will certainly email this presentation out to you all. I'll have Dr. Bean send it out if need be. And certainly if you have questions, comments, concerns, you can always email me at any point in time.
All righty, I think I got that all done in just in the nick of time.
That fiscal handbook's in the board folder, so
Yes.
guys want it.
Bio break for 2 minutes for anybody.
Yes.
To do that, and then we'll get our attorney online.
And then Mary Beth?
I'll take care of it. She showed me how.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, we have the attorney
Get on
online.
there and I have to hook up this one to the cable.
Okay.
Can we start?
Jerry, we're just gonna take a bio break and then we'll get you on.
No problem at all.
Emergency.
And we will give you access to share screen, okay?
Sounds good.
Put that right by the speaker. How do I get rid of this layout?
Seeing you get an email for each one.
I don't want to share. It's not what I want to do. Stop sharing.
Yeah, I think it's nice.
How do I allow sharing? Multiple participation can share.
Who's that smiling attorney right there?
Right on cue.
Remember, fractional billing, we haven't started yet.
Fractional billing. All right, you can test to see if you can share, Jerry.
All right, sounds good.
We had, is he with you before?
Yep.
Yeah. Remember we had, you got Jim Young, the big dog for us one time.
Oh, yeah.
And I just talked to somebody who knows the core and Young Mini and core.
Yeah.
I think that's just coincidental, really fascinating.
15-minute deal.
Did you see that fiscal training online at all?
So she gave her the second one.
All you need to really know is North Compass, which you said is their name.
Yeah, I tried.
Their understanding of the funding mechanism for state California charters. Yes. The budget she predicts. 1-2%. Is a major budget provision, which if there's anything outliers, we adjust everything.
No, good, thank you.
So we try to keep the cash flow in, paying our loans. On the day. So he does as best you can. With us borrowing a lot of money in our years. Succeeds and they go really good, it's just when they increase it. They can raise money, you know, or any other company.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
That would be
$4 million. Credits us for bringing the idea. Well, we'll take credit, don't we? You know what? It's amazing what you can get done if you don't care who gets credit. Okay. Felipe, we still have you okay? Proud of you.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, I miss your voice. I like to hear you chime in.
You know, I had two thoughts. I did have two thoughts. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
So two things. One, Delano's explanation there, maybe think about the first year that the school was running, where we had so many people accusing the board of exactly the activities he talked about. And it seems to me like they almost had a template to follow. You know, that's what I always thought. I mean, I didn't know where they were coming up with this stuff, but it's from past boards and charter schools and activities. They knew exactly what to say because people have done it in the past. So I found that very interesting. And also, I'll be watching all of you very closely now.
Well, let's respect Jerry Simmons' time and let him take us through the next part as we get ready to. I've invited a guest to this portion of Brown Act training. Tiffany Kraft served as PTO member, and this will be, this applies to your PTO role too. But I want the board to get to know her a little bit, because I think there's some future recruitment we have to do as a board, where we may invite some others to inquire and express their interest in being on the board. And her and I have already talked about that in her interest. So it's perfect if she sits in on Brown Act training, at some point it will qualify for a full year, because we do it regularly. So with that, Jerry, thank you in advance. Please take it away.
Great. Well, pleasure to be with you this morning. My name is Jerry Simmons. I'm one of the partners at Young Mini and Core, and just a tiny bit about my background as we get into this, that I started my work with charter schools now, back in 2001. So that gives you a sense, coming up close to 25 years ago now. My work initially began with helping groups of parents and teachers around California start several hundred charter schools. And I did that work for the Charter Schools Development Center back when State Senator Gary Hart had gotten some funding to hire one person to be a charter school developer. And so I had that role for a period of time before starting here at Young Mini and Core, and then have been here with the firm for just coming up on 20 years now this summer. So anyway, I do a couple of things that I focus on aside from charter school development. One is governance trainings. And a lot of that work is informed by the other half of what I do, which is that I lead the firm's crisis management team. So I lead efforts when clients are in the news, when there are audit issues, when there are allegations of criminal conduct against a charter school or its board or officers, things like that. And so, a lot of that work sort of, leads me to do these sorts of trainings to hopefully keep people out of trouble. And so you'll hear me throughout just sort of sprinkle in some stories here or there, which will give you a sense of, how failing to govern well often leads to, sort of what I call the path to the dark side, where problems arise. But without further ado, I'm going to jump in today on our topic, which is understanding the Brown Act. The Brown Act is the state's open meeting law, so I'm going to talk about that first, and then I'm going to talk about conflict of interest laws at the back half of the training. So the Brown Act, its purpose is really just to allow members of the public to come to hear your discussions, to see how you're voting on policy matters that impact them or their students or their employment with the school. And essentially, almost all your meetings, as you know, are held in what are known as open sessions in front of members of the public. There's a few exceptions to that we're going to go over here during the course of the presentation. The Brown Act does apply to meetings of committees of the board almost always, in addition to the board itself. So it applies anytime that either the board or a committee of the board is meeting to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on an item of school business. So even just hearing a presentation like you did just prior to me, or this presentation, triggers the need to have an agenda posted to let members of the public know that you're doing that. The only exception to it applying also to board committees is contained here on this slide. It has to be able to check all 4 of those boxes in order for the exception to apply. But, what I always tell folks is that this is not a game to figure out how you can check the 4 boxes. Rather, I think you always want to make sure you have the right people in the room to make the best possible decision. That should be your driving factor. So if you need parents in the room to make a good decision, or if you need employees in the room as members of a committee to make a good decision, then then by all means, do that. And, then you can check here to see, does that require you to post an agenda or not? But I'm always a fan of good governance, and good governance comes from having the right people in the room. Serial meetings are prohibited under the Brown Act, and this is essentially exactly the opposite of what you're supposed to be doing. So serial meetings involve a majority of the members of the board who are engaging in a series of communications outside of an agendized board meeting, and that can occur through direct communications like a phone call or text message. It can occur through intermediaries. This would be, if I were a board member and I tasked my wife to come and have a conversation with you that I knew I was prohibited from having myself, then, that person would be an intermediary in that sort of case. Technology, through use of technology, text messages, emails, social media posts can lead to problems. And then, the last sort of factor here, if it's about school business, discussing, deliberating, or voting on any item of school business, okay? If you check all those boxes, then you've got a serial meeting on your hands. What should you be doing instead? You should be having your conversations about school business during a board meeting, like the one you've got going on right now, where you've posted an agenda and members of the public can come and hear the discussion and give you a certain amount of limited public feedback. So here's a bunch of ways that these serial meetings can occur. What I would tell you is that historically, it used to be that telephone calls were the primary way, that it happened. For a minute, faxes were a thing. They're not really anymore, of course, because almost all of us communicate virtually all of our stuff via email and text messages. I would share that social media became an issue for a minute, kind of during the pandemic, as there was a lot of public controversy, of course, relating to, should schools be open or closed, and should there be masking or not, and vaccines or not, and, all of that stuff that none of us want to relive. But there were a number of parents and school employees using social media, and that prompted, in some cases, by some charter schools, a situation where their board members began commenting or replying to social media posts from parents. And where that became a problem, of course, is when you start to see a majority of the board posting on that same topic in response to the same post, then it created a potential serial meeting violation. All right, so this is going to be the most complicated thing we'll talk about today. There are now two distinct and different ways that you can have teleconference meetings under the Brown Act. I'm going to suggest strongly that you stick to this first method, because the first method is clear, it's clean, it's been in the Brown Act for many years, it's easy to follow, not too many restrictions. But there is an alternate path, and I'm going to talk to you after I get through this first option about why, in certain circumstances, you might want to use that alternate path, notwithstanding that this is generally going to be the best approach. So these normal rules for teleconferencing, there are 6 special things you have to do to allow any board member to participate from some location other than the place where the rest of the board is meeting. The first is that the agenda has to be posted at all teleconference locations. So obviously, if it's a last minute situation where you're not going to be able to make a board meeting, that will not work for this method, because you would have to know a full 72 hours in advance of a regular meeting or a full 24 hours in advance of a special meeting exactly where you were going to be so that you could have the agenda posted there. The second is the teleconference location has to be identified. So there has to be a specific address You know, driving somewhere on the 405 freeway is not a specific address. You know, you have to be able to put down your home or the Starbucks or, you know, your business address, some specific location where members of the public can join you at that location. All votes have to be taken by roll call. So if you do have a vote while a member is participating by teleconference, you have to call out each board member's name one at a time, each time the board votes on an item, and wait for them to respond with a yes, a no, or an abstention. All of the meeting locations have to be accessible to someone with disabilities. So where this normally comes up is, you know, in some homes, there may be stairs on the way into a home. There may not be wheelchair access. And if that's the case, then you can't have that location be a teleconference location. It's got to be someplace where folks with disabilities can access the meeting. Then members of the public have to be able to hear and speak to you from each of these teleconference locations. That's pretty simple now because almost all of us have smartphones. We can just push the speakerphone on our iPhone or Android device, and you know, suddenly that member of the public can hear everything and can also speak to you. And then finally, a quorum of the board has to participate from within the charter school's jurisdiction. So for you, that is Orange County. You don't necessarily have to have your board meeting at the school site, even though that may be most convenient most of the time. You could hold it at another location in the county if you so desired, and that would be still within your jurisdiction. So that set of rules, that is the easiest, quickest, simplest way to have a board member participate by teleconference. But I mentioned that there were going to be maybe a situation, a rare circumstance where you might want to utilize Path 2, which is much more complicated, but I'm going to just sort of quickly go over it with you. Effective January 1 of 2023, you know, AB 2449 took effect, and it allows board members to also participate in a board meeting if they have an emergency or just cause as defined in statute. And what it allows you to do that's different, the advantage to using this path, is a circumstance where something comes up last minute after the agenda has been posted. You're unable to identify, therefore, the meeting location where the board member is going to call in from. And, you know, maybe you've got a circumstance where you're in a hospital or some other location where, you know, having public access is not going to be possible. So in such a circumstance, assuming you meet the statutory criteria and you follow all the special rules that I'm going to go over, you can utilize this narrow exception. But the reason why I don't tend to recommend people do this is because there's a lot of ticky-tacky rules that are, you know, they're like landmines for you, and it's easy to miss one because there's just so many, and it's easy to lose track and then have a problem. So first off, you know, if you've got a circumstance like this, the member of the board in question can notify the agency, in this case, the charter school, all the way up to the start of a regular meeting for just cause twice per calendar year. And then if you've got an emergency circumstance, same sort of deal, you notify the board, and the board can then decide whether to approve your request to participate or not. Okay. Now, an emergency circumstance is narrowly defined as a physical or family medical emergency that prevents a member from attending in person. Whereas just cause is a much longer list here. It can be childcare or caregiving needs of different family members. A contagious illness, noted as not necessarily COVID, could be any number of different illnesses. A need related to a physical or mental disability that is defined in law and not otherwise accommodated. Or travel while on official business of the charter school board or some other state or local agency where maybe you are employed. If you want to make that request to participate via an emergency circumstance, you know, you're going to make that request, and then the legislative body, in this case, the board of the charter school, would make a decision at the beginning of the meeting whether to honor that request or not. And the board could say, no, we're not going to honor that request. We'll see you at the next meeting. One of the ticky-tacky rules here is that the legislature decided to create a very complicated 3-tiered system for how often you can utilize these requests to participate via this methodology. And you'll see that laid out here. So it's just one of a number of special ticky-tacky rules. I'm going to go over several more here. A little bit different than the normal teleconference rules. If you have one person participating by teleconference under these rules, at least a majority of the members have to participate from a single physical location within the jurisdiction. Whereas under the normal teleconference rules, a majority of you would just have to be somewhere in Orange County. You wouldn't have to necessarily be all together at one single site. Okay. Next up is that instead of just having a speakerphone on your iPhone and being good to go, you've actually got to have a video link available to the board member utilizing these rules. The agenda also has to have some special language on it, which means that if you want a member to ever be able to utilize this second pathway, you've got to incorporate that language onto your agenda template so that every meeting agenda will always have that required agenda language on it. This next one has proven to be a little challenging, not so much at this time of year, but during the winter time, we had some clients who ran into issues where you know, there were power outages during winter storms or things of that nature, and the meeting broadcast was disrupted. And under these rules, the board then has to suspend action at the board meeting until access to the meeting is restored. And so, you know, that can be problematic if the power goes out or something like that. Also, the board cannot require public comments to be submitted in advance. This was not an issue with most charter schools, but some school districts and cities during the pandemic, you know, had requirements that public comments be submitted in advance of meetings and then be read into the record. And the legislature has expressly prohibited that here. And then finally, and probably most bizarrely, some legislative aide, no doubt at 2 in the morning without thinking about this very much, had added this language to the bill that the member has to publicly disclose before action is taken if any individuals 18 years of age or older are present in the room at their remote location, as well as the general nature of the member's relationship with any such individuals. The reason I think this one is particularly strange is because, you know, if anyone was to show up to your meeting right now in person, they would not have to identify themselves. They could sit in the same room with you. You might introduce yourself and ask their name, and they might decline to provide their name. You know, they would be under no obligation to tell you who they were. But if they just so happen to be in the same room as a board member utilizing this teleconference procedure, then the board member has to actually identify them. And if you think about when this is going to come up, it might come up like if a board member or their spouse is in the hospital, for example, something like that. And you can just imagine how strange it would be to say, oh, over there, that's Nancy Smith. She's my husband's doctor. It's like, why does the public need to know that information? It just seems very strange. But nevertheless, it's one of the many, many ticky-tacky special rules that apply if you utilize this alternate method. So all of that to say, you know, the first normal way to do teleconference is much more straightforward. It's simpler, has a lot less ticky-tacky rules, less minefields where you might inadvertently step in the wrong place. So my suggestion would be utilize those original normal rules whenever possible. In terms of posting the agenda, you have to post it properly in advance of the meeting. With very few exceptions, if an item is not on the agenda, the board simply cannot discuss it at the meeting. So how far in advance do you need to post? 72 for a regular meeting, 24 hours for a special meeting. There is technically an emergency meeting, which would allow as little as an hour's notice, but only if there's a crippling natural disaster or you've got a circumstance where there's work stoppage, i.e. a strike. And I've only had that come up one time amongst all the charter schools we represent statewide in 23 years. So it gives you a sense of how rare, it would be that a charter school would be able to conduct an emergency meeting. You're going to post that agenda physically within your jurisdiction. You're going to post it on your website homepage, and you're going to post it at all teleconference locations if you have any. Now, the public has certain rights during your meeting. They can give you oral testimony at the meeting subject to reasonable time limits that you set. Most public agencies choose 2 or 3 minutes for public comment per individual. If someone is being disruptive, which means something more than they're being disrespectful or rude, they're actually talking over board members as you're trying to conduct the meeting or something of that nature. My suggestion is you recess the meeting, try to get temperature to come down a little bit, and then proceed with the meeting. If they continue to be disruptive, they have a loudspeaker, they're, doing something to prevent you from being able to conduct business, then what I would do is you're sort of going to have to escalate to your worst case scenario, which is call law enforcement and have them removed from your meeting. That's very rare in a charter school board meeting, but I have seen it happen on a couple of occasions where, there were purposeful protests going on that were disrupting a board's ability to conduct business. Members of the public do have the right to audio record and broadcast from your meeting. So members of the media can do that. Random members of the public can pull out their iPhone and broadcast you on Facebook Live, things like that. So just be mindful as you conduct your business that, you might be recorded and that someone might share snippets of the recording with members of the public. You can have no conditions of public attendance so that you can't put in place a policy that says, you have to be a resident of the school district or you have to be a parent at the charter school in order to attend the meeting. Nothing like that. All your facilities have to allow for reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And finally, the public is entitled to a copy of agendas and other public writings once they are distributed to a majority of the members of the board. So that board packet that you might get 72 hours in advance of a meeting, members of the public will have a right to see those documents that relate to open session agenda items. So what are the times you can be in closed session? Well, there are 6 reasons: pending or anticipated litigation, personnel, and this one has a number of subparts for, when you're interviewing folks, when you are evaluating folks, when you're disciplining employees, when you're firing an employee, all of those under the general personnel exception. If you are ever going to hear complaints or charges, meaning you're literally conducting a hearing and you're hearing from all parties relating to an employee misconduct matter, then you have to give notice to that employee in advance of conducting such a hearing. It's not normally our advice that the board ever play that sort of role because it creates a number of compliance-related issues elsewhere. What are other permissible closed sessions? You can meet with your real estate negotiator to talk about the lease, sale, purchase of real property. You can meet with a labor negotiator who is going to negotiate on your behalf with either unionized employees or non-unionized employees, either one. After 9/11, you're also allowed to meet under this public security exception with a number of different law enforcement agencies or your legal counsel to discuss threats to public facilities that you operate. And then finally, the education code has a special provision allowing you to meet in closed session if you're dealing with pupil discipline, like the expulsion of a student, for example.
Jerry, one question.
Yep.
What's the appropriate place to discuss hiring prospective new executive directors, recognizing that discussion about salary is public? Do we do discussions about the selection of a executive director in closed session?
Great question. So for if you're in the process of hiring a new executive director, the interviews of all of the candidates for executive director would be closed session matters. If you are negotiating about the salary or other provisions in the contract, right? You can direct your labor negotiator in closed session, providing guidance and parameters to that person to negotiate on your behalf. And then you're quite right that the final contract is always approved in open session after you have reviewed a salary compensation study and after you have done a public announcement of all of the financial components of the contract. And when I say financial components, that's more than just salary. It's also the value of health benefits, vision benefits, dental benefits, retirement benefits, you know, any sort of thing like that, right? Anything that would have value, even beyond salary, you're going to be announcing what that value is of each of those kinds of components. And then you would, after doing that public announcement, after reviewing the salary compensation study, you would then vote to approve that final contract in open session.
So this is a very relevant topic for us. My name is Brett. If there are, you said interviews are done in closed session, if there are recordings, let's say it's done via Zoom, the recordings, do those need to be made public?
No, they do not. And, you know, it's up to you whether you decide you want to record closed session meetings, because there's no requirement in law that you do so. But if you do, they're not made public. You know, the one thing about recording closed sessions, they can be helpful in terms of proving that you were, you in fact kept your dialogue to appropriate closed session topics, right? But if someone were to challenge later and say, well, I think during that thing they posted as executive director interviews, they were really talking about, you know, cookies in the cafeteria and what kind of cookies that there should be served during lunchtime, you know, something unrelated, right, to the closed session. One thing they could do is ask a judge to review a recording that exists and determine whether a violation of the Brown Act occurred. So, you know, the recordings are always a double-edged sword because they can help you to prove you were in compliance, or, you know, if somebody missteps and starts talking about, goes off on a rabbit trail, they can also be, you know, evidence that that the board did not stick tightly to the closed session description. So totally up to you whether you record them or not, but definitely not disclosable to members of the public.
And can you walk us through the board discussion on a final candidate or final two candidates to be considered for a vote by the board?
Sure. So typically, you know, in closed session, you're going to interview normally some group finalists, I'm going to call them. You know, maybe you've done some initial paper screening, maybe you had 30 applicants, maybe you got it down through paper screening to 5, maybe then, you know, it'll be obvious that, you know, you have consensus that maybe 3 of those 5 you interviewed are just not a good fit. All that will be happening. All that conversation will happen in closed session. Then maybe as a board, you'll have consensus that you've narrowed it down to the final 2. And what that could look like is either maybe you bring those 2 finalists back again, and maybe you schedule another closed session to meet with just those final 2 and to ask additional questions and see, if one sort of stands out among the 2, if those 2 candidates seem like really equally matched and you're really having a hard time making up your mind, which of the 2 is better. Alternatively, if it's clear that the board has one favorite, then typically what I would suggest is that you authorize the board chair to commence negotiations with that finalist. And you would not tell the secondary person that you're doing that, right? Because you don't know, maybe that first choice that you picked, maybe you won't successfully come to terms. And I had a client actually recently who this happened to, where, they got all the way to the end and they had a finalist, but they could not come to terms on an employment agreement with that person that was their first choice. And so they had to move to candidate number 2. Because they just couldn't get the deal done with candidate number 1. And so you want to try to avoid having candidate number 2 know that they're not your first choice, because that kind of puts things off on a bad foot sometimes to start a new relationship. Like, hey, I guess I'll go to the dance with you because the person I really wanted to go with said no. It just creates an awkwardness, right? So my suggestion to you would be, if it's a circumstance where one stands out, you start negotiating with that person. You hope to sort of bring that to a close within a couple days' time, and then have it come back to the board for a final contract approval. That's your hope. And if it doesn't work out that way and you can't come to terms, you move to candidate number 2, you start negotiating with them. And then again, within the span of a few days, you'd hope you'd be able to come back to the full board for doing the open session piece and approving that final contract.
So I just, our particular situation is our current ED may be hired for a position with the county. And so in parallel path, we are looking at some other candidates for the ED role. We won't know the decision until later today. We're all very hopeful that it will be positive. But we have a board meeting later today. So in the board, well, it's not agendized, so we can't do that. Is that right?
You have an updated,
We have an update,
executive search update today.
but but if we wanted an action,
Right,
it's not agendized. So
correct.
we can't do that.
Right,
Yeah, we can't do that, right? Because
That's right. So you could call a special meeting of the board, at some point, and that would be appropriate. You could do that. But again, requires at least 24 hours notice. But you don't need to wait all the way until your next regular meeting, is I guess what I'm trying to signal to you. If, your current executive director gets named county superintendent, then you could be in a situation where you need to call a special meeting and begin conversations.
So we're assuming, on the assumption that there is going to be a special meeting anyways, is there anything that we can do today to, you said to authorize the board chair to commence negotiations with a finalist? Is there anything we can get started on today for planning purposes of a special board meeting, in 24 hours or 48 hours?
So I wouldn't do that without a closed session, because I think you'd want to have that conversation in closed session so that the board agreed on the parameters for that conversation, in terms of, what sort of salary range does the board feel comfortable with? What kinds of benefits does the board feel comfortable with? And then, because if you have that whole conversation in open session, obviously it makes it really hard for you to negotiate with a candidate if they know that, the board is hypothetically okay to spend up to X dollars, then, that's really hard to negotiate, if someone is aware what that upper end limit might be, because it sort of might then become the floor of the negotiation, as opposed to maybe you're given an authorization to do a range and you might start at the bottom of that range and you
Yeah.
know. You
And
get
then-
the point.
And then you mentioned the salary study, you know, we did one too. Is this something that we have to commission, or is it something we can refer to from the local, you know, schools? We did a salary study, I think, a couple of years ago. But in anticipation of a special session here, special meeting, there may not be a lot of time. I think in the past we have commissioned YMC to help us with that.
Yeah, so it does need to be updated. And we could put one of those together very quickly because we routinely do them for executive director positions. So that would not take much time. And so if that's something that the board is interested in having happen, certainly we could put that together for you in preparation for a meeting that you would hold.
Okay.
The one other sort of note which is important around this is that when you are selecting a new executive director, you need to do that particular selection is one of just a couple of things that must occur at a regular meeting of the board, not a special meeting. So even though you could have a special meeting to talk about negotiations and to authorize the board chair to begin negotiating, that final contract approval, the reading aloud of, you know, the financial terms of the agreement and the salary compensation study, all those things would come forward at a regular meeting of the board. If that is too far away, right? Like you're looking at the calendar and you're like, Jerry, well, that's a whole month from now or something. We don't want to wait that long. Then one thing you could do, and some clients have done historically, is, you know, they hold a special meeting of the board to give authorization to the board chair to negotiate. And at that meeting, they also revise their regular meeting calendar to add a regular meeting to the calendar. And, you know, that would potentially allow you to, you know, take action sooner than your next currently scheduled regular meeting.
Thank you. And then the actual name of the candidate, once the negotiation is done, it would be at that regular board meeting that the full name would need to be disclosed, right? And the contract. would be
That's
made.
correct.
Yep.
That's correct. Until that time, it is confidential only to the members of the board. And, you know, perhaps, you know, you might, for example, involve our office in drafting the employment agreement. So we might know, you know, the candidate who you're negotiating with, but outside of that, nobody would be aware all the way up until that regular meeting where, you know, the contract is made public. All right. Well, with that, I actually conveniently did cover this executive comp piece as we were talking about that, your questions. So I'm going to move on to just some slides on conflict of interest law to make sure we cover this, and I'll do my best. I know that you're pressed for time, so I'm going to do my best to just, you know, just cover these reasonably quickly, but just to make sure you have a refresher. So a conflict of interest for any of you or your staff arises when one of you has some private financial interest in the outcome of a decision that's being made by the charter school. And then you either participate in that decision-making process, or you are influencing that process, or you're even just attempting to influence the process. Maybe you weren't successful, but you tried to influence the process in some way. Any of those things are problematic under California conflict of interest law. And they can result in one of two things. Either fines can be imposed on you by the Fair Political Practices Commission, or in certain cases that we'll talk about here in a second, it may be a violation of Government Code Section 1090. And violations of Section 1090 are actually felonies in the state of California. And we do have one former charter school board member who was successfully convicted of a Government Code Section 1090 violation. And it does so happen that that person was from Orange County. And the Orange County DA's office pursued that matter vigorously and was successful. So here are some common types of financial interests regulated by conflict of interest laws. Times where you've got ownership or investment in a business entity that's going to do business with the charter school, investment in real property that might be in close proximity to the charter school. You've got some source of income, typically a job, but it could be royalties or some other sort of payment with an entity that is going to do business with the charter school. You've got some source of gifts that looks problematic from the standpoint that, you know, the individual or company giving you gifts wants to do business with the charter school. Or failing the four above, it has some effect on your personal finances, either positively or negatively. Financial interests of immediate family members typically are covered. So if you have a spouse or a registered domestic partner, or you have a minor child who has any of those sorts of interests, then those same sorts of interests typically are imputed to you as if you were directly receiving that income, or you directly had an ownership interest in that business, even if you don't in fact have such. So Government Code Section 1090 is the most serious kind of violation. It involves a public official, which is any member of the board or any officer or senior employee of the charter school, who is making a contract for sale or purchase of goods or services, and where that public official has a financial interest in the contract. If you have those three things, then that is flashing red lights. Be sure to consult legal counsel before you proceed. Note that, you know, if you have a financial interest, that the entire board is prohibited from entering into the contract, even if you abstain from the vote, even if it's the best vendor, even if it's the best price, even if it's the only vendor who can provide that service for 300 miles, unless an exception to Government Code Section 1090 applies. I don't have time in the context of this to go through all of the potential exceptions that might apply, but I would tell you that, you know, the most common time where we find an exception applies will involve nonprofit agencies, where perhaps a board member is employed by a nonprofit or on the board of a nonprofit or something like that might trigger an exception. So, but again, very detailed fact analysis, because all of those exceptions have very detailed, you know, rules around them and when they apply. So, note that making a public contract is also defined very broadly. It's not just the vote. It's not just the signature on the piece of paper. It's also the entire planning process, solicitation for bids, earliest discussions about issuance of an RFP, things like that also are problematic if you're participating in those discussions or votes. So under Section 1090, a violation is a felony and the contract is void. So you're not doing yourself any favors, nor are you doing any business any favors, because they're going to end up providing goods or services and not get paid ultimately by the charter school, because the contract will be void. So this one just can't emphasize enough that we have had a number of clients since Section 1090 was made applicable to charter schools come under investigation by local DAs or other law enforcement agencies. So if you have any sort of circumstance where you've got a financial interest in any sort of contract being done by the charter school, that's something we should have a private conversation about, not here in a public board meeting, but you know, that's something you please reach out, and I want to keep you out of trouble and not have you be in a circumstance like that. Now, if you end up in a circumstance where one of those exceptions to 1090 applies, then we will do an analysis under the Political Reform Act, which is very similar, but not exactly the same in terms of what qualifies something as a potential Political Reform Act violation. Again, we only get here if there's an exception to 1090. If there's no exception to 1090, then full stop. The agency is not going to enter into the contract. But if an exception applies, then we've got a circumstance where, in most cases, under the Political Reform Act, that board member or that management employee can recuse themselves from the process. And if they recuse themselves from the entire decision-making process and the vote, and they leave the room while the discussion is occurring, if they do all of those things, then it may be that the remaining members of the board can vote to approve that contract. The Political Reform Act also requires a conflict of interest code be adopted and then revised periodically by the board of directors as changes occur. That conflict of interest code is going to require the filing of a Form 700, and it has to be done by April 1st annually, as well as within 30 days of you assuming office or being reappointed to the board, as well as within 30 days of you leaving office if you resign or your term ends and you decide to not re-up as a member of the board. If you fail to file, and that failure to file is deemed to be deliberate, you could face criminal charges by the Attorney General or District Attorney, and you can be fined. Now, where I see this most often coming up is circumstances where somebody may obviously have some business interests because, for example, maybe even the charter school's website identifies that you're CEO of the XYZ company in town. And, you know, your authorizer goes to look at your Form 700 and the person is checked no reportable interests or something like that. And, you know, that triggers an inquiry because somebody says, well, wait a minute, how can it be that this person is employed by a very prominent business in town, but they have no reportable financial interests? That seems very unlikely that they're not getting a salary to be CEO of this company. So just be mindful not to just quickly check that no reportable interests and turn in your form. Make sure you're actually reading the instructions. If you have any questions at all about whether something is reportable or not, the great news is on the front of the form, there's a 1-800 number. You can call the Fair Political Practices Commission, and they are some of the best public servants in the state who answer your calls on that, and they will help you decide, you know, does this require reporting? And if so, where on the form should I put this down? A couple other things about that I just want to make sure I cover because we've seen, you know, an uptick in issues around this. You know, it used to be when I started in this work that charter schools were really tiny little entities. Maybe they had 100 kids, you know, so nobody really cared to give gifts to board members to get in good graces or to get contracts because, frankly, charter schools didn't have any money. So there was no point in getting a contract with a charter school. But now charter schools are bigger. They're serving more students, and as a result, their budgets are bigger, and as a result, the value of the contracts they issue are bigger. And so this issue about gifts is becoming more of an issue. So just be aware, general rules, you're not going to be able to accept gifts of more than $500 from one source in a calendar year. And the general rule is that gifts of $50 or more must be reported. And that's true whether you know, you get one nice lunch from someone or whether they take you to Taco Bell 10 times and that crosses the $50 threshold at some point over the calendar year. There's many exceptions to both of those general rules. So if it's a special occasion like a birthday or a holiday, you can get gifts from anyone other than lobbyists as long as you are giving gifts of similar value to them on their birthday or their holiday. Inheritance, obviously we know dead people are not trying to bribe you, so you can always inherit money. That's not a problem. This incredibly long list of family members, including the spouse of your first cousin once removed, can give you gifts because we assume they're doing that because they love you and not because they're trying to get a contract, as long as they're not a lobbyist. Your long-term friends, your college roommates, people like this, fine to get gifts so long as that's proportional and you're giving them similar value gifts as long as they're not a lobbyist. And if you're dating and you've got a bona fide relationship and they're not a lobbyist, similarly, you can receive gifts, okay? Now, if you get a gift and you go, this feels uncomfortable to me, this is from the curriculum company that we do business with, and I got tickets in the mail to this event, what would I advise you to do? Return the gift. Return the gift within 30 days. Just put it back in an envelope and return it. Because otherwise you're going to be in this circumstance where either A, you're going to have to report it because it's probably going to exceed the $50 threshold to report. And that's not going to look good to authorizers and others, right, when they review your form. Or, it might be a gift that even exceeds the annual limit, in which case, you could subject yourself to fines and other things. So it's not worth it. And often the businesses who do business with charter schools don't understand these rules. So, you'll have to educate them and send their gifts back. This is the one area where people sometimes make mistakes. Sometimes they accept a gift and then they think, you know what, there's a family, maybe I know they just lost a son to cancer. I feel bad for them. I'm going to accept these tickets to the Anaheim Ducks game, and I'm going to give them to the parents of that kid because I feel like they need, a pick-me-up event or something. That's where you're going to get in trouble, because even if you turn around and donate those tickets immediately to some other charity or to some other person, it doesn't matter because you still accepted the gift. And the minute you accept the gift, you've got the obligation to report, and you're subject to the $500 gift limit, even if you give them away. So best thing to do is just return them and avoid that whole mess. Lastly, you've got, even if all of the statutes above that we've discussed don't prevent you from doing something, just be aware that if there's some sort of conduct that you're engaged in that's creating an appearance of impropriety, even if a financial interest is not at stake. And this comes up sometimes, for example, where, maybe you've got one of your own children, maybe you're a parent on the board, one of your own children is facing a student discipline matter, and you start to engage in conversations about that, using your board, authority around that. It can create an appearance of impropriety, right? And that's prohibited. And then this last one is about incompatible offices. And right now we have a big fight about this going on in court up in Northern California. We have a charter school executive director who was successfully elected to the Sacramento County Board of Education. And a whole bunch of folks have filed a lawsuit to try to remove him from the county board because they believe that being executive director of a charter school and being on the County Board of Education is an incompatible public office. So just be mindful of the fact that if any of you decide you want to run for state assembly or county board or various other things like that, that's great because we need charter school supporters all over the place. But it may mean that you'll have to give up your seat on this board when you are successfully elected to that other position. So, stay tuned on that, but this lawsuit is going to be an interesting test case of charter school interests overlapping with that of other public offices. And with that, I'm done with my slides, but just wanted to pause for a minute and see. I know we had some questions earlier, but wanted to just see if there were any further questions before we sign off for today.
Oh, thank you, Jerry. Two questions. The first is if you're able to quickly go back to slide number 9, it's not a serious question, but it'll be fun. And then I've invited a guest to be along with us who serves on a board called our PTO, okay, here's my question. What board is that with those 9 members? Is that a legitimate board in that photo? Or do you have to describe who that is for younger people? Okay, everybody knows it's the Brady Bunch. Moving on to a serious question. This is Tiffany Kraft, who serves on our PTO board, which helps raise funds, support parents and activities at the school.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm not sure if you can see me. I'm kind of off to the side on the screen, but as Doug has stated, I am currently serving as the treasurer for the parent-teacher organization at IIA, and it's a 2-year term. So I've just fulfilled the first of the 2-year term, and I am interested in an IIA board position potentially, and I've been invited to have some discussion about that because I know we have policies and procedures in place for that process. Now, were things to move forward and I'd be offered a position on the IIA board, would it be a conflict of interest for me to also serve as the treasurer of the parent-teacher organization?
So that's a great question. I think that ideally you would not be in both of those roles at the same time. And I'll tell you why that is my view. And I want to make clear that that this is not about you personally, nor, of course, I've never met you, so this is not a personal comment, just for anyone who might be watching this via video or something. But there have been circumstances in the past with other schools where there have been questions about PTO expenditures, PTO revenues, just circumstances where, there might have been allegations of improper spending or things of that nature. And, ultimately, who's going to be in charge of investigating those sorts of issues initially is going to be the charter schools board. And so if you're in a situation where you're on the board that is sort of theoretically going to be supervising and overseeing, what's happening over there at the PTO, and you're the treasurer of the PTO at the same time, that I think gives rise to a potential conflict. It's not, it wouldn't always be a conflict, right? It wouldn't be an automatic conflict. It's just more a circumstance where if an allegation like that were to arise, you could see how something like that could turn into a conflict scenario. So I think it's best if you can sort of be in one position or the other, rather than both at the same time, just to avoid, that conflict potentially arising down the road. And again, that's not because I'm aware of any allegation whatsoever against either you or the PTO at this point in time. It's just, just sort of a best practice, I would say.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Hi, it's Brett. I have a few questions. So there's roll call at the beginning of the board meeting, but then there's roll call for every vote. So if you are late to a board meeting, you miss the initial roll call, but you join later, how does that impact your ability to vote for the remaining portion of the meeting where there may be action items?
It does not impact your ability to vote. One thing that you might choose to do is to note in your minutes when a member arrives, sort of in between action items. You might say board member Bob Smith arrived at 11:36 a.m. or something like that. And similarly, you could do that when board members depart, if you thought for some reason that was important to note for the record. Most of our clients don't do that, but I have seen some do that when board members were particular that they wanted it to be known that they were either there or not there for a particular discussion or vote. That's the way they've handled that.
So if they're present for the actual vote itself,
they get to vote.
They get to vote. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you be out of the county and host a board meeting remotely, assuming that you post the notice wherever you are, but is that something where the actual board meeting has to be hosted at the site, at the school?
So the actual board meeting has to be hosted somewhere in your jurisdiction, which is Orange County. So it does not need to be at the school. It could be at the beach, as long as you're in Orange County, right?
Okay, but the person leading the meeting, can they be,
They can be anywhere as long as, you know, you meet, as long as you meet the teleconference rule right here on this slide here that,
quorum is in county, right?
that the quorum is in county. Yep.
Okay. You started talking about the exceptions and the, you know, the emergency circumstance, right? And you said it was very sticky and all of that, but you had made an interesting comment about the video link must be up. So if you're calling in remotely to a standard teleconference, well, partially teleconference meeting, right?
Yep.
Most in person, but someone's calling in, they can be calling in via phone without
Correct.
a video link, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You started talking about disruptions in a meeting, let's say protesters, what have you. Can you end a meeting? I know you said you can pause it, let's say, you know, temperature, wait for temperatures to die down. If it's extremely disruptive, you may need to call the authorities. If it's somewhere in between, right? Can you actually end a meeting due to serial disruptions?
You can, and we've had clients do that in the past. For example, there were some schools in LA that were facing disruptions due to union organizing activities. And they actually made a decision to end the board meeting and just reconvene, right, at a different date and time. What they discovered, though, at the different date and time is that the disruption occurred again. So, you know, I mean, if the thing is ultimately, if the temperature doesn't come down and folks are prepared to disrupt every meeting you have, then at some point you sort of get stuck escalating to calling the authorities, right? But my point was just really, typically that's not the case. You know, with most folks, you're going to be able to recess the meeting for 10 minutes and they'll calm down and you'll be able to get your meeting going again, you know, and that's usually more convenient for the board because you don't have to all come together and, you know, meet again a different date and time. So.
Thank you.
Follow-on question from
We're
David
gonna
Sun
wrap
as
this up
well.
soon. We're gonna have to wrap this up because we have another attorney.
Oh, that's right. We got another attorney waiting too. Which one's charging more? Just kidding.
Hello, yeah, this is David Sun. Yeah, just a simple question. Can the board meeting take place in someone's property or on someone's property? For example, if you know you have a backyard, you said, hey, let's invite all the board members. We can have the board meeting there and provide you know food and refreshments and something like that. But to make that accessible to you know whomever wants to participate, is it possible?
So I didn't understand the first part of that. So is it possible for the board to be meeting somewhere else? And where is that somewhere else?
Backyard.
Oh, a backyard.
Picture, like Bill
Yeah, as
Gates.
long as members of the public,
David's son.
I mean, as long as members of the public have access to the meeting, you can meet anywhere within Orange County.
All right, Jerry, we're going to end our time with you, but with the last question, since this morning's session was just mainly trainings, do we need to officially close the morning session and then restart for the actual public meeting? Or do we just go through it?
So, I didn't look at your agenda, but assuming everything is on the agenda for today and it's on the same agenda, you just keep moving through the agenda items.
All right, so, but will they need to take roll call with the two members that just came in the last 20 minutes?
So if two members came in and were added, right, you can add them to the roll call list as of the time that they entered, or you can just proceed, you know, with the meeting, and as they vote, it'll be clear that they were here for the votes.
Perfect. All right, thank you, Jerry. We appreciate you.
You bet. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good one. Good one. All right, so my suggestion is that we don't have to close, which is great. My suggestion is we get your lunch and then go into closed session with our closed session item.
Yeah, closed sessions up that.
Understand?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, we don't have to open up and, yeah, we just keep going. Sounds good. All right, lunch is here, guys. grab lunch, and then we'll go into this room over here to have private closed session. And Allison, we will,
Hey, everybody.
1 or 2 seconds, okay? Mary Beth, are we doing the closed session in this room or a different link? And is this the correct link? Because I see Allison on there. Okay, but I also see OCDE on there. They're not supposed to be on closed session. Okay. All right, Allison, give us 5 minutes. They're gonna grab lunch, okay?
No problem. I'll be here.
Okay, Mary Beth, we'll put in the minutes, when we reconvene and, we say what came out of closed session, we'll acknowledge our other board members as well.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I knew. It's Chinese.